I want to start my discussion with Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. I started the book and it's about 1,000 pages, so I'm through the first 20% of the book. And my first notes on Magic Mountain will be on the notion of time. And I want to relate it to the hedge fund business because I think it's a very important part of the business, time, and how we feel about it and what it actually means for us and also what it means for people that start a hedge fund. I think often time can be your biggest enemy, and I think knowing how to think about it can be very helpful. This is an In Wrong podcast. It's October 14th, 2021. This is Krim Telco. For the day, the fund is up 2.4%. The market's up 1.6. We are up 14.5% for the year. The market's up 17.3. We're underperforming by 2.8%. The main outperformance today comes from the biotech index. I think what we said during the discussion of CTX 110 and the CAR T cell therapies, we thought that the market was disappointed because of certain details about efficacy and those sort of things. But overall, I think the potential here is so immense. And safety is good, which is important. And as long as the safety is good, I think iteration and the CRISPR technology and the low cost of iteration will allow us to get much better results and hopefully also get much, much better cures for cancer. And I think this is a nice segue to the notion of time. So let me first start with the book, Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, and then make the relation back to the hedge fund business. I think it's a very important one. And like a lot of things in this podcast series, it might sound maybe a little bit too academic or philosophical, but believe me, if there's one thing you need to understand in the hedge fund business is that you need to learn how to take time to your advantage and not against you. And a lot of people, they fail because they don't know how to deal with time. So let me first talk about the book. Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann, one of his stones, one of his big achievements. He's my favorite German writer because he combines novelism with philosophy, or in other words, he really attacks the big, deep questions, the questions that I think science cannot answer, and only our artists, in particular, novelists, can answer. So Mann is definitely here in the realm of people like Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, Sartre, incredibly deep and important questions that come up in the novel. So let's start with time. This novel was written in the first part of the 20th century, so right after Einstein's general relativity, which gave us a different notion of time, kind of like time as a fourth dimension or time, space-time, and all these things. So, of course, people, intellectuals like Thomas Mann, would start thinking about what it actually means to be passing in time. And he says a few interesting things. First and foremost, he says that time is certainly not linear. Time goes by faster or slower, depending. It's kind of in the eye of the beholder, if you want. And that's, I think, one of the big achievements of this novel is to understand that for certain people, time is the same situation can be the end, and for others it can be the beginning. It's the end of an old area. The Magic Mountain is certainly uh, uh, is inspired by the pre-World War I times in Europe. This sort of morbid, static society that is going towards a massive break and a new beginning, and therefore also time has very different meanings for different people. But I think most importantly, and I think this also relies to the quote that Lenin said, sometimes nothing happens in centuries, and then sometimes centuries happen in a few weeks. I think the more you do, the slower time goes, the less you do, the faster time goes. And those are things that are, I think, deeply philosophical, and the practical application of that is, of course, um, why do I care? Well, why is this important for the hedge fund business? And I think it's important for the hedge fund business because you have to understand that the valuation of stocks in the hedge fund business is Bayesian. It's not the right way to do it, but it's the best way that the financial markets have understood how to value stocks. So they're Bayesian, which means they take information and they change their probabilities and they then value a stock. From a hedge fund perspective, I think you can arbitrage that because you can say, I'm not Bayesian, I am Deutschian. I look at a problem and I look at the way the problem is being solved. In particular, Launch Capital Partners, we've coined the notion of the cost of iteration, which is inversely correlated to the speed of disruption. And if we see that the cost of iteration are coming down and the problem is big enough, then we also see a massive, massive valuation. And therefore, we don't really care what the day-to-day value is of a stock. That's why our degree of freedom is, in a sense, only to find the right company to invest in. And the right company is the company that has an ability, a process in place to lower the cost of iteration, and at the same time is attacking a big problem. And therefore, we're invested in Tesla, we're invested in the CRISPR Biotech Index. We don't care about the day-to-day business, not because it's beneath us or anything like that. It's just simply the wrong way to value these stocks. The right way to value these stocks is to see the problem and the path towards solving the problem and anticipate the creation of an innovation stack, which first and foremost makes it very difficult for competitors to compete with the company, and second also opens up many new avenues for wealth creation. So time for us is defined by two things. One is we have to survive. So we have a daily requirement to cover our costs, to spend money on things. So we need to have that money available. And time is also defined by the cost of iteration. The lower the cost of iteration, the faster you get to solution. Or in other words, now this is a little bit tricky. There's some mental yoga to be done here. The faster the iteration, the slower time goes, which is in line with Thomas Mann's notion that the more you do, the more active you are in life, the slower time goes. This just means it might be a negative way to say the slower time goes, but what it also means is you have a much, much longer longevity. You have more longevity, or you're much, much more robust, because this is also, certainly you can borrow the anti-fragile concept of Nassim Taleb. The more you iterate, the more you error correct, the longer you live. Or in other words, the slower time goes for you. And in other words, the less you do, so now if you're a static company or a static society, if you will, that is not able to iterate, not able to error correct, the faster time goes for you, the more that it means the faster you go towards a conclusion, which is death, or some sort of irrelevance, or whatever that death means in the context of business. So this is the key. Now, when I say the slower time goes, of course, that has an implication that maybe time goes slow, and this could be painful for us in terms of waiting for results. And that is partly true. That can happen. That we can be in a situation where, for example, Tesla was doing all the right things, but still for quite a while, actually for, let's say, about 2 years at least, was almost, I would say, in a situation where not much was happening. So time was going very slow for Tesla, but they were iterating like crazy. And they improved their longevity, and they sort of, those 2 years became just 2 months for the life of Tesla, versus those 2 years for, let's say, GM became 20 years. In other words, while Tesla was extending their longevity, in the same time, GM and Ford's longevity was diminished, because Tesla is so much more competitive than these companies and will put these companies out of business, including Volkswagen and all these other companies. Having said that, of course, there is now a backlash against that, and companies are fighting with tooth and nail to try to survive, in particular with the US. They're using the Biden administration, NHTSA. They're using almost everything they have now in their political arsenal and lobbying and all these things to try to stop Tesla. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about pure error correction in the business, in the realm of business, and the ability to solve problems and therefore become competitive. So back to the discussion, as far as a hedge fund is concerned, if you are running a hedge fund, you have to understand that sometimes a company can do all the right things and be error correcting faster, and that can slow down the time for the company in a sense that it can increase the longevity of the company. At the same time, you could run the risk that the market is looking at this and pricing it from a Bayesian perspective and saying, well, there's no new information. And information that the market looks at is unfortunately not the kind of iterative error correction that we look at. The market looks more like at results. So if you just keep iterating at 4680 batteries, the market will not give you much credit until you start shipping these batteries at scale. Although the actual event, the actual value creation happens way before that. And this is what we at Orange Capital Partners are focused at. As to the extent that we can, we try to assess, okay, how much are the cost of iteration coming down, and therefore we can expect faster error correction and therefore faster solution of the problem. The same applies to the CRISPR side of things. And this is why last weekend, for example, we had this episode after the allogene therapeutics bad news that came out, basically that put allogenic cell therapy sort of in the penalty box. And then we said that this is an event that we don't price because the event per se is not that important for us. What's really important for us is that the cost of iteration are coming down through CRISPR in particular, CRISPR technology, base editing and prime editing, and that we therefore have a chance to solve these problems much faster and therefore increase the longevity of our companies, or in other words, if you want, increase the valuation of our companies. So to summarize, the market is Bayesian and the market looks at time in a linear fashion. We believe that's wrong. You should not look at the time. Time doesn't go linearly. This is what Thomas Mann says in his book, and this is what it applies to the hedge fund business. Time is not linear. Time, as far as wealth creation is defined, concerned, is defined by the cost of iteration. And the more technology and processes you have in place to lower the cost of iteration, the more you extend your longevity or your valuation. So if you really want to look at a daily sort of pulse of how much, let's say, a stock should be worth, this is what you should be looking at. What are the costs of iteration? Are they coming down? Can we error correct much faster? This is the fundamental thesis at Orange Capital Partners, based on the principle of David Deutsch's Beginning of Infinity, also based on the innovation stack, and to some extent 0 to 1 and the innovator's dilemma. This is the key. So the principle stack that we use to assess our investments is culminating in the question, what are the costs of iteration? Are they coming down? What are you doing to bring them down so you can solve problems faster and get results faster? The faster you can do that, the more longevity you gain, and the longevity is directly related to the valuation. Thank you.